Invalid. That's what Rochelle from HR said to my face while sipping her oat milk latte and adjusting her tortoiseshell glasses like she was about to explain basic math to a golden retriever. Your complaint lacks merit, she continued, voice dripping with the kind of condescension they must teach in advanced corporate gaslighting courses. And frankly, the language you used in your initial report suggests emotional instability rather than legitimate workplace concerns. I sat there in that beige conference room that smelled like stale printer toner and broken dreams, watching her shuffle through my carefully documented evidence like it was contaminated toilet paper. 3 months of overtime records, payroll discrepancies, safety violations. I'd photographed with timestamps and GPS coordinates, all dismissed with the corporate equivalent of a head pat and a participation trophy. But here's what Rochelle didn't know while she was busy explaining why my concerns were invalid. I'd already made copies of everything, and those copies were sitting in a manila envelope addressed to the Department of Labor Investigation Unit, along with a cover letter that started with the phrase, "I believe my employer is engaged in systematic wage theft and workplace safety violations." Let me back up. 6 weeks before this delightful HR execution, I was pulling doubles at Vanguard Medical Distribution. Not the fake company from those scripts I mentioned earlier, but an actual warehouse operation that moved medical supplies across 3 states. Sounds important, right? Life-saving medications, surgical equipment. Things that matter, except the only thing management cared about was cutting costs and covering their asses when things went sideways. Which happened roughly every Tuesday. I worked inventory control, which meant I counted, tracked, and verified every single item that came through our facility. I knew when shipments were short, when invoices didn't match, when temperature-controlled medications sat on loading docks in 95-degree heat for 4 hours because Trent, our warehouse supervisor, was too busy chain smoking Marlboro Reds to coordinate with the refrigerated truck drivers. But the real kicker, the thing that made my stomach turn every morning when I clocked in, was the overtime scam. C Company policy clearly stated anything over 40 hours was time and a half. Except they had this creative little workaround called shift averaging, where they'd split your hours across 2 different departments on paper. So a 50-hour week became 25 hours in receiving and 25 hours in shipping, neither hitting the overtime threshold. Brilliant, right? Except also completely illegal. Not just sketchy, not just unfair, straight up federal labor law violation. The kind that makes Department of Labor investigators wake up in cold sweats from excitement. I started documenting everything. Not because I was planning some grand corporate takedown, but because I have this annoying habit of keeping receipts when things smell fishy. And brother, this place reeked like a fish market in August. Every pay stub, every schedule change. Every time Trent told someone to clock out and keep working off the books, I photographed it. Did all my phone became a digital crime scene, and honestly I thought maybe if I presented it properly professionally, they'd fix it. Because surely nobody wants to run a company that treats people like disposable machinery. Surely wrong. So goddamn wrong. The breaking point came on a Thursday when Jessie, a single mom who'd been working there longer than anyone, got hurt. Not dramatically. Not in a way that made headlines, just a simple slip on a puddle of hydraulic fluid that had been leaking from the same forklift. For 3 weeks. Management knew about it. I'd personally reported it twice in writing, complete with photos and suggested solutions, but fixing it would have meant shutting down that forklift. For half a day, and half a day of downtime was unacceptable to people who measured success in units. Per hour, she twisted her ankle, nothing broken but enough that she couldn't put weight on it. Trent's response was pure poetry. Take some ibuprofen and walk it off. We're behind on the afternoon shipments. Workers' comp is a hassle for everyone. Jessie limped through the rest of her shift because she needed the money, because missing work meant missing rent, and because she'd been told multiple times that injury reports reflected poorly on department performance metrics. And poor performance metrics affected everyone's quarterly bonus, including hers. I watched this woman who'd trained half the warehouse staff, including me, hobble around on a swollen ankle because acknowledging her injury would mess up Trent's safety bonus and possibly trigger an inspection that would reveal other creative interpretations of OSHA regulations. That's when I snapped. Not visibly, not dramatically, but something inside me shifted from frustration to fury to cold, calculating rage, the kind of rage that doesn't explode. It plans that weekend. I drafted my complaint, 11 pages single-spaced with exhibits, photos, timestamps, and a timeline that read like a federal indictment. I didn't just report the overtime theft or the safety violations. I connected the dots, showed the pattern, demonstrated how every corner they cut was part of a deliberate strategy to boost profits while grinding workers into dust. I cross-referenced company policy with federal regulations, cited specific labor codes, included a detailed cost analysis showing how much money they were stealing from employees. Every pay period, I even included a section on systemic retaliation, explaining how the bonus structure incentivized supervisors to discourage legitimate complaints. It was beautiful, professional, and absolutely damning. I printed 3 copies, one for HR, one for my files, and one for what I was already calling Plan B. If you're watching this and nodding because you've been there too, smash that subscribe button. We're building an army of people who refuse to get stepped on, and every click tells the algorithm that worker stories matter more than corporate PR bullshit. All right, back to the systematic destruction of Rochelle's worldview. I submitted my complaint on a Monday morning. Bright and early, walked right up to HR's reception desk and handed it to Candace, the administrative assistant who looked at the thickness of the packet like I'd just asked her to translate ancient Sanskrit in triplicate. She'll review this and get back to you, Candace said, already reaching for her stress ball, which honestly should have been my first warning sign. 3 days passed. Nothing. Not an email, not a phone call, not even a passive-aggressive note in my employee mailbox. Meanwhile, the workplace drama continued unabated. Trent kept scheduling people for impossible overtime splits. The hydraulic fluid puddle grew larger and more creative in its placement, and management held 2 separate meetings about the importance of maintaining positive attitudes during challenging times, which is corporate speak for shut up and deal with it. Then on Thursday, Rochelle finally summoned me to her office. Not the conference room, her actual office, with its motivational posters about teamwork and synergy and a coffee mug that said, "World's okayest HR professional," which in hindsight was truth in advertising. She didn't shake my hand, didn't offer me coffee, just gestured to a chair like I was there for a performance review. Gone wrong. Her desk was conspicuously clean except for my complaint sitting in the center like evidence at a crime scene. "I've reviewed your submission," she began, "and I have to say the tone is quite concerning. You've made some very serious allegations without considering alternative explanations." Alternative explanations? I repeated, my voice steady, despite my pulse hammering like a jackhammer against my ribs. "Yes," she continued, "perhaps the scheduling discrepancies you mentioned are due to system errors or communication breakdowns rather than intentional policy violations. Our payroll software is quite complex and mistakes happen, and the safety issues you've highlighted may reflect individual employee choices rather than management oversight." Individual employee choices? You mean like Jessie? Choosing to slip on hydraulic fluid that had been pooling for 3 weeks after I'd reported it twice, in writing with photographic evidence and suggested solutions. Rochelle's smile tightened like plastic wrap over spoiled meat. Employees have a responsibility to report hazards and follow safety protocols. If she didn't file a proper incident report, that's not a management failure. It's a failure of personal accountability. I stared at her, really stared, until she started fidgeting with her pen and glancing at her computer screen like it might offer an escape route. She filed the report. Trent rejected it, said it was user error and that Jessie should have been more careful around machinery that she'd been working with for 6 years. Rochelle blinked once, twice, then opened a file folder that looked suspiciously thin for an investigation into 11 pages of evidence. I don't see any documentation of a rejected report in my files, which brings me to the core issue here. She leaned forward like we were old friends about to share secrets. Your complaint, while passionate, shows a fundamental misunderstanding of employment law and workplace policies. What you're describing as wage theft is actually flexible scheduling designed to help employees balance their work-life commitments. What you call safety violations are isolated incidents that don't reflect systemic problems. And frankly, your emotional investment in these issues suggests you might benefit from our employee assistance program. We offer counseling services that can help employees process workplace stress in healthier ways. There it was. The moment when you realize you're not having a conversation, you're being handled like a PR crisis that needs to disappear quietly. Rochelle wasn't investigating my complaint, she was managing me out of it. The emotional investment comment was particularly brilliant. Classic corporate gaslighting frame. Passion as instability, dedication as dysfunction. Make the person reporting problems seem like the problem themselves. I kept my voice level, my expression neutral, but inside I was taking notes. Mental screenshots of every word, every dismissive gesture, every legal landmine she was stepping on. So you're closing the case? Then I asked. She nodded with the kind of finality usually reserved for funeral directors. The case is resolved based on my investigation. Your concerns don't meet the threshold for policy violations. However, we do appreciate employees who care about workplace issues, even when their understanding might be incomplete. Incomplete. I stood up slowly, careful not to let my chair scrape against the floor. Anything else you need from me? She shook her head. Just continue being a valuable team member, and remember, our door is always open for constructive feedback. Constructive feedback, presumably meaning feedback that didn't involve words like illegal or violation or federal investigation. I walked out of that office with my face calm and my fists clenched. But here's what Rochelle didn't know about me. I don't just keep receipts. I keep insurance policies. And my insurance policy was sitting in my kitchen junk drawer, a business card from Elena Vasquez, Labor Standards Investigator, Department of Labor Wage and Hour Division. I'd gotten that card 3 months earlier at a community workshop. About worker rights, never thought I'd need it, but some paranoid part of me had tucked it away just in case. Just in case had arrived that afternoon, I called Elena's number, half expecting voicemail, half expecting to be transferred to some bureaucratic black hole. Instead, I got a human being with a slight accent and the kind of no-nonsense tone that comes from years of dealing with corporate bullshit. Hello, this is Elena Vasquez, hi, I said. This might sound strange, but I think my employer is stealing wages and covering up safety violations. There was a pause. Not uncomfortable, just professional. Elena taking notes, you think? Or you know? The difference hit me, like cold water. I know, I said. I have documentation. Elena's voice shifted slightly, becoming more focused, more interested. I see. And have you reported this internally? Yes. HR dismissed it. Said, "My concerns were invalid." Elena made a sound that might have been a snort, wouldn't be the first time. "How much documentation are we talking about?" I looked at my kitchen table where I'd spread out copies of everything. Like a conspiracy theorist's fever dream, pay stubs, schedules, incident reports, photos. Enough to wallpaper a small bathroom and redecorate the closet. Elena was quiet for a moment. "Then let me ask you something. Are you calling because you want this fixed or because you want them to pay because the department doesn't do therapy?" "We do enforcement both," I said without hesitation. "Good," she said. "Schedule's tight, but I can meet you Saturday morning. There's a diner on Elm Street called Maxine's. You know it?" I knew it. Old school breakfast joint with vinyl booths and coffee that could strip paint. Perfect neutral ground for what felt increasingly like a covert operation. Bring everything, she continued, originals if you have them, copies if you don't. "And one more thing. If what you're telling me checks out, this isn't going to be a quiet conversation anymore. You understand that." I understood it perfectly. Some fights you whisper, some fights you scream, and some fights you let the federal government handle the screaming. Saturday morning came gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that makes everything look like a film noir establishing shot. I arrived at Maxine's 15 minutes early, clutching a document box like it contained state secrets. Elena was already there. Corner booth back to the wall, laptop open, and what looked like a federal agent's idea of casual wear, dark slacks, white button-down hair, pulled back in a way that said, "I mean business, but I'm approachable enough that you'll tell me everything." She spotted me immediately. Probably because I was the only person in the diner carrying a box labeled evidence in black Sharpie. "Elena Vasquez," she said, standing to shake my hand. Firm grip, direct, eye contact. The kind of handshake that inspires confidence in the federal government's ability to ruin someone's day. I slid into the booth across from her and opened my box like Pandora with better organizational skills. "Pay stubs first," I said, sliding a stack across the table. "These show the split department trick, 49 hours logged as 24 hours, receiving 25 hours shipping." Elena put on reading glasses and started flipping through the documents. Her expression didn't change, but she took notes in a small leather notebook that looked worn from use. Then came the safety documentation photos of the hydraulic leak incident reports that were submitted but never acted on email chains. Where I'd asked about repairs and been told it wasn't in the budget, she worked through each category of evidence, methodically: wage discrepancies, retaliation, documentation, management, communications that proved they knew about problems and chose to ignore them every few minutes. She'd ask questions. Specific technical questions that told me she knew exactly what she was looking at and exactly how deep the company had buried itself. "This email here," she said, pointing to a message from Trent about keeping overtime under control. "This suggests they were actively monitoring hours to avoid premium pay. And this one about the safety budget being frozen until the next fiscal year. That's consciousness of guilt. They knew the equipment was dangerous and chose not to fix it." After an hour and a half, she closed her notebook and looked at me directly. "When did you say HR dismissed this complaint Thursday?" Elena pulled out her phone and made a note. Then she looked up with something that might have been a smile but felt more like a predator recognizing prey. "Here's what's going to happen," she said. "I'm opening a formal investigation as of right. Now, your employer has 15 business days to provide complete payroll records for all employees. Going back 2 years, they also need to provide all safety incident reports, training documentation, and personnel files for management staff, including any communications about complaint handling procedures." I felt my pulse quicken. "What does that mean for me?" Elena's smile became more genuine. "It means you don't work there anymore. Not because you're fired, but because you're now a protected federal witness. It means if they try any retaliation, and trust me, they will. We add those charges to the growing pile, and it means that in about 3 weeks, some very unhappy people in very expensive suits are going to realize that dismissing valid complaints doesn't make federal investigators go away. It makes them curious. I left Maxine's feeling like I'd just signed a pact with a very efficient devil, but also like I'd finally found someone who spoke my language. Elena had given me her direct number, told me to document any changes in my treatment at work, any conversations about my complaint, any sudden policy updates that felt retaliatory. The company had no idea what was coming, and honestly, I was starting to look forward to their surprise. Monday morning at Vanguard Medical Distribution felt different. Not because anything had actually changed, but because I knew something they didn't. I clocked in, said good morning to Jesse, who was still limping slightly, and pretended everything was normal. Trent was his usual charming self, barking orders and chain smoking like the Marlboro man's angrier younger brother Rochelle stayed in her office, probably updating her LinkedIn to include crisis management under special skills. But I noticed things differently now. The way conversation stopped when I walked by, the way Trent suddenly started being extra careful about safety protocols, the way Rochelle kept glancing at me during the weekly all-hands meeting like I might spontaneously combust and take her performance bonus with her. The investigation envelope arrived on a Wednesday, delivered by certified mail to the main office with copies going to every level of management from Trent all the way up to corporate headquarters in Atlanta. I wasn't there when it was delivered, but I heard about it from Candace, who looked like she'd just watched someone get struck by lightning. It was immediate chaos, the kind of panic that spreads through middle management like food poisoning at a corporate retreat. Trent actually stopped smoking long enough to pace around the warehouse, muttering about federal overreach and employee loyalty. Rochelle disappeared into emergency meetings that lasted hours and involved people in suits who definitely weren't from the local office. Thursday morning brought the second wave, a team of actual investigators who looked like they'd stepped out of a procedural drama. All business suits and clipboards and badges that made everyone nervous. They set up in the main conference room and started calling people in. One by one, employees, supervisors. Anyone who might have relevant information about payroll practices and safety protocols. I got called in around noon, led to the conference room by a woman who introduced herself as investigator Patricia Chen. Her handshake was as firm as Elena's, but her smile was colder, more clinical. She had the kind of presence that made you want to confess to things you hadn't even done. The questions were thorough, methodical, designed to build a case rather than gather general information. She asked about specific incidents, specific conversations, specific documents. Did Trent ever instruct you to clock out but continue working? Did Rochelle ever suggest that reporting safety issues could affect your employment? Did anyone in management ever explain why overtime hours were split between departments? Each question felt like another nail in a coffin. I was happy to help build. The whole process took about 40 minutes when it was over. Patricia handed me a business card and said, "If you remember anything else, or if anyone approaches you about this conversation, call me immediately." The implications hung in the air like smoke. Friday brought the third wave, and this one was personal. Trent called me into his office around 3 p.m. His usual swagger replaced by something that looked like fear mixed with barely contained rage. "Close the door," he said, not please. Not. "Would you mind just close the door?" I did, then sat down without being invited. He stared at me for a long moment, probably trying to decide between intimidation and bargaining. "Heard. You've been talking to some people," he said finally. "People who care about following labor laws," I replied, my voice steady despite my heart doing gymnastics in my chest. Trent's jaw tightened. "You realize this affects everyone, right? Not just management." if they shut us down. Everybody loses jobs, including you and that company in Atlanta that writes your paychecks. They're not going to be happy about federal investigations, that there's the classic retaliation threat disguised as concern for fellow workers. Elena had warned me this would happen, told me to document everything. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. Mind. If I record this. Trent's face went through several colors before settling on something that doesn't exist in nature. Put that away, he snapped. This is a private conversation between you and me about your future here. My future, I repeated. Still recording, is that a threat? Trent stood up fast enough to knock his coffee mug over it, hit the floor, and shattered, sending dark liquid across the linoleum. No threat, he said. But actions have consequences, and some consequences are harder to live with than others. Like what I asked you. Tell me specifically what consequences you're talking about. Trent realized he'd backed himself into a corner. Just forget it, he muttered. You'll figure it out. I stopped recording and looked at him. Really looked at him. A middle-aged man in a company polo who'd probably never had his authority questioned by anyone without an MBA and a corner office. You're right, I said, standing up. Actions do have consequences. He probably thought I was backing down. Probably assumed he'd scared me into compliance. Instead, I walked straight to my car and called Elena. The phone rang once. Elena Vasquez. Congratulations, I said. You just got your retaliation evidence. Her laugh was sharp, satisfied, and slightly terrifying. Was he stupid enough to threaten you directly? Stupid enough to do it while I was recording it? Elena made a satisfied noise that sounded like a cat who'd just cornered a particularly slow mouse. Forward me that recording and then go home. Don't go back to work until you hear from me. Trust me. This just got a lot more expensive for them. The next week passed like waiting for test results that you know are going to be bad. I stayed home officially on administrative leave. While the investigation continued, Elena called twice to update me. Both times, she sounded like someone watching a favorite movie. Reach the good part. They're scrambling, she told me on Tuesday. Brought in outside counsel, trying to do damage control, but it's too late. The evidence is too solid, the pattern too clear. Corporate sent down a cleanup crew from Atlanta, but they're just making it worse. Trying to explain away things that can't be explained. By Friday, the news broke not in major headlines, but in local business journals and industry publications. Vanguard Medical Distribution under federal investigation for wage theft and safety violations. The article was small buried on page 6, but it named names and included quotes from investigators about systematic violations and management misconduct. Elena called that afternoon. We got them. She said simple and final. The settlement negotiations start Monday. They'll pay back wages with interest. They'll implement new safety protocols. They'll probably fire half the management team, and they'll never mess with another employee. Complaint the same way again. What about Rochelle? I asked. Elena's laugh was sharp. She resigned yesterday along with Trent and 2 other supervisors. Apparently, they decided to pursue other opportunities rather than explain their management philosophy to a federal judge. The final settlement came 6 weeks later. Every employee got back pay with interest, totaling just over $400,000 across the entire workforce. Safety violations were corrected with a comprehensive equipment overhaul, and the company implemented a new complaint process that actually involved investigation rather than dismissal. They also had to pay a federal fine that, according to Elena, was substantial enough to get the attention of their corporate overlords in Atlanta. Rochelle never contacted me directly, but I heard through Candace that she'd moved to a small firm in another state where presumably she could practice her unique brand of employee relations on a smaller scale. I never went back to Vanguard Medical Distribution, but not because I was blacklisted because I didn't want to. Elena had introduced me to other investigators, other cases, other companies that needed someone who could spot violations and document them properly. Turned out, there's decent money in being a professional whistleblower. Who would have thought 6 months later I got a LinkedIn message from someone I didn't recognize. Subject line said, "Thank you for the precedent." It was from a worker at another medical distribution company who'd read about the Vanguard case and decided to document their own overtime violations. They used my case as a template, followed the same steps, contacted the same department, and won their own settlement. Apparently, word was spreading that HR dismissing complaints as invalid wasn't the end of the conversation anymore. It was just the beginning. And that's the thing about bullies. Whether they're in elementary school or executive suites, they count on people being too scared or too tired or too isolated to fight back. But sometimes you find out you're not as alone as they want you to believe. Sometimes you find out that invalid is just another word for inconvenient. And sometimes you discover that the best revenge isn't getting mad, it's getting federal. Thanks for watching, you workplace warriors. Hit that subscribe button. Unless you're Rochelle, in which case maybe consider a career change. The algorithm loves when people stand up to corporate bullshit, so every like and share helps spread the word that workers don't have to take this crap lying down. Remember, if HR says your complaint is invalid, they might just be scared. It's too valid to ignore.